Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you so much for taking the time to join me today. So in the next kind of 30, 40 minutes, I'm going to provide you with ideas and suggestions on how you can support your design teams with any kind of learning content and documentation, especially as you plan for rolling out any kind of new software. My name again is Jennifer McMillan. I work with Ascent, which is a sister division to RAND 3D. So where RAND 3D is one of the consulting and the training delivery wings of our parent company, RAND, the Ascent group only focus is on documentation and developing learning content. As a company, we've been developing learning content for more than 20 years. And personally, I've been involved right from the beginning. Everyone on our team at Ascent are dedicated to curriculum development as their primary role. We have instructional designers, engineering subject matter experts that kind of encompass multiple industries, technical writers and editors, as well as even project management professionals. Initially, our project work and probably the work that you already know us for was really focused on developing standard learning guides, whether it was for Autodesk content, PTC, or even Dassault Systems products like, software, CAD tools, or data management products. These guides would generally be used in standard training classes that you might take with RAND 3D, could be used with self-paced learning as well. But in fact, a significant portion of our work today is actually working directly with customers like yourselves, or even directly with software developers to design and develop learning solutions. And it is this unique combination of expertise that is something that I'm really proud to say really sets us apart from the industry. In this session, I want to share with you my 25 years of experience to get you really thinking about how you can approach the implementation of any new software, whether it's small or even the large implementation. So whether or not, you want to chat with me or RAND 3D further or not, I certainly hope you get something out of this and give you some, some food for thought. I mentioned that the presentation will be about 30 to 40 minutes, and then, I'll be taking questions at the end through the question panel. So as companies like yourselves, begin to adopt new software, learning and documentation must be part of kind of that complete implementation plan. And so in this presentation, I'm going to focus on three main objectives in my session, and they're highlighted here in the three boxes. And each one of these represent an important stage where we feel having a plan around your training and your documentation is really key to a project's success. Ultimately, you certainly want to start with ensuring that implementation team has the necessary technical knowledge to make the decisions that are going to have to be made. And then, it's all this knowledge that's going to then shape and determine all of those workflows and everything that gets defined through the implementation stage. Ultimately, that's going to guide all your end users with, their day-to-day work at the end of the whole project. And then finally, at the end, you need to train all those end users. So it's going to be kind of these three objectives that I'm going to focus on today. So please keep in mind, though, that these 3 points are focused on really just the learning and the documentation, and how they play a key part in the success of any implementation. I'll not be talking about software implementation directly, and in fact, the implementation phase itself is actually a separate phase for sure. But it's something good to note that there is a lot of overlap with, my topics that I'm talking with and the stages of your implementation. So firstly, I want to, start with that very first box, the first objective that we just saw. And specifically, this is around training that implementation team. As you begin any project, everyone is well aware that the selection of that implementation team is really the first step. The people selected for this team, are likely going to be selected for maybe their company knowledge, maybe specific technical knowledge that they have, or maybe even prior experience with the new software, maybe that they worked in at other organizations. But it's generally is always the case that not everyone on your team is actually going to have that same in-depth knowledge to get started with. And so that's something that, it's really important to make sure that it's everyone has the same knowledge. In deciding how best to train your implementation team, you can consider some of the following. First off, what training does the team need? The answer to this will likely really widely vary from customer to customer. Some of you may still be deciding which software product to use or which vendor to go with. And others may have decided on that, and now they just need to understand what that software can do. But in either case, really, I'd like to say, keep this saying in mind. You don't know what you don't know. And it's a really good saying to keep in mind because you don't want to narrow the focus at this point on what the software can do. Take the training, learn all that's possible. At this point, making decisions about how you want the implementation of the software to go is really difficult if you don't have that clear picture. So definitely training your implementation team is really important. The next question might be, when should this training be completed? In my opinion, as soon as possible at the beginning of an implementation. Again, knowing how all the software products work is going to allow for better decision making. A big caution here, though, is this initial training really must be focused only for that implementation team. I would not recommend pulling all of your users into this training. There, definitely should be time allocated at the end of the implementation for all your end user training. But really teaching them all the software skills too early, it doesn't lead to success because they're not going to be able to go back to their desk to be able to work on the software right away. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that as my third objective, but I did want to make that one clarification there. And then lastly, what format should the training be in? Many implementation and training partners provide open enrollment training, where you can learn software in a classroom or even in an online environment where you have an instructor presenting. You can also talk about having dedicated classes for your team only. Many partners that offer training like Rand3D also offer self-paced learning in our case with Rand3D through Productivity Now. Although self-paced is an option, personally, my feeling at this point is that the purpose of training that implementation team is to ensure that the entire team has the exact same baseline knowledge to make decisions. The self-paced route certainly will teach the same content, but it's that interaction and that focus on each topic that will be different for everyone in that team. It's a small team. I would really focus on, doing more of an in-person class. It prevents team members from getting distracted, with other work commitments. It also gives that collaborative work environment in the training classroom, which is really difficult to replicate in kind of an e-learning environment. And ultimately, this initial training is really to get to the point of starting the implementation. So, the quicker you can get this training completed, the better. So just kind of to summarize a little bit about, what we were just talking about, your implementation team needs that baseline understanding of what the software is capable of. And it's in this kind of preliminary training that everyone on that team should be taught the same content. The goal of this training should not be to define how your organization is going to be actually using the software. It's going to be focused on learning the software skills and what's possible with the software. Throughout the implementation, certainly budget is a really important consideration. At this point, I really don't see a need for really having expensive customized training materials developed. There's certainly going to be time for this at the end of the project with training the end users, but for now, I'd recommend focusing on standard out-of-the-box training that can be provided by partners like Rand3D, for all the classes you need. Ask them about maybe having dedicated classes, what that can fit to your team's schedule. Maybe even have their instructor travel to you, so it helps limit the expense on having all of your people travel as well. Another mistake here some customers make is, trying to fit in too much in too short a time. So again, keeping with the standard out-of-the-box training can certainly help to avoid this. Often I hear from the sales teams that say, oh, can we do 10 days of training in 4? Ultimately, you're not going to catch everything. So, take that investment up front, take the training that they're going to need and learn everything you can. And then finally, if you're working with any implementation, RAND, 3D, or other, certainly they can help make suggestions and provide guidance on, what courses they can offer and what might be needed for you. So now that you've trained that implementation team, you're really now ready to get into the implementation and start making decisions on how the software is going to be rolled out. And the overall plan will start to really become into focus. My objective too for today's session though is more focused on the specific documentation considerations that you should be thinking about throughout the implementation phase. So at this point, your implementation team has decided on the software, they know how to use the software. So right now they're making those decisions on how they're going to use their software with your workflows and your processes. By accurately documenting that knowledge, it isn't just known by the team. It can be really shared then and referenced very easily with other design teams so that, you ultimately are going to have a good accurate description of exactly the decisions that have been made. Some things to think about as you start thinking about putting pen to paper, we'll say, what format should this be in? I'd say most customers choose something as simple as, Microsoft Word. However, even before making that decision, I'd like to suggest to you that you make decisions on how everyone is actually going to access that information. And that might drive then the format you're going to be using. Will it be going into a SharePoint server where you're simply going to be going in, locating and opening and closing documents? Will it be set up on some type of wiki type of homepage where, there's a lot of searching capabilities across multiple documents, easy to use, that type of thing? You should also consider, how and who are going to be updating these documents, as changes are made. Certainly, regular maintenance of these documents is really key to them staying current. And honestly, if users know that they're being maintained, they're certainly much more likely to continue to actually use them. So, the purpose of properly documenting your standards and workflows is something for sure that I get all of you understand the importance of. You certainly don't want the knowledge of how things are going to work to remain only with that select few people in that implementation group. But the key is that now that decisions are made, you really don't delay in getting started with that documentation. It will be a work in progress throughout the entire implementation process and even beyond. So getting started initially with what you need to start writing is really, really important. And what I want to aim here is, to pass that information to you and show you how important that is. I think there are many customers where many customers struggle is really in setting aside the proper time and resources, especially to ensure this documentation is actually done right. In my experience, the most successful implementations are where the team, and even maybe more importantly, management, understand that good documentation actually takes time. Where they know it shouldn't be something that just gets added to one member's to-do list when they have other responsibilities. I would certainly highly recommend incorporating a documentation specialist into your implementation team, where this resource's sole responsibility should be documenting the standards and workflows, as the team develops them, as they make changes. These types of specialists are excellent in taking that technical knowledge from the team and then putting it into clear and consistent, concise documentation that's really going to be easy to use and maintain. I've also, I've already mentioned, but it's an important one. So, ultimately, how these standards and workflows are actually consumed by all your end users also is a key metric in the success of your implementation often. So again, maybe what you want to do is asking that documentation specialist can really take time to ask those questions up front. So, how you have that valuable metric that you can establish, what you're going to be, guiding, what's going to guide success of the project in terms of it. I previously mentioned, a few options like SharePoint, wiki page, but, someone that is a documentation specialist definitely can help you with coming up with, the right solution and format for you. One final thing here, I would also recommend an overall kind of encompassing document policy be implemented, and this is going to explain the objectives of all of your standards and workflows. It's going to define who must adhere to them. It's going to explain why they're being implemented and, how to use them. Describe, who's responsible for governing them and enforcing them, and can even describe kind of the change process that are going to be used to keep them up to date. So having this type of policy, will help also all of the end users that are going to be using these documents really gain a better understanding of the importance you are placing as management on these standards, so that they start to get buy-in to using them. And now my final objective for today is really going to be focused now on the training your entire team. What you should be considering when deciding, how to train that workforce on your new software skills and also on the standards and workflows that you've just defined during implementation. So ultimately, the purpose of this step is absolutely, providing the design team exactly what they need so that, as they begin to work on new projects, they can be successful. All of those important decisions that the implementation team has been made around standards and workflow must be taught. They also must learn the actual new software. So you're rolling out new software, they have to learn the skills of how to use them. After all your investment that you've made to this point, you certainly do not want to solely rely on each user learning the software on their own, or maybe then simply sending them to those documents that you've created and like relying on them understanding and interpreting the standards all in the same way. There has to be some training around this to help guide them. And also, as you know, training definitely does not amount to an insignificant cost. As much as I've left this to the end of the implementation process, it certainly is something that you need to consider and plan for, and certainly budget for as early in the process as possible. You should also consider answers to maybe some of the following questions as well at kind of that early stage. Firstly, when should the training occur? Certainly, we talked about earlier with the implementation team, doing it right at the beginning was really good. But in this situation, I'd recommend definitely holding off training till you're getting closer to rollout. You do not want to send everybody through training and then not allow them to practice their skills when they go back to their desk because they have to finish other projects with the old software. So, this is definitely a bit of a balancing act in terms of when the best time to roll out training will be. But certainly talking with your training partners will help guide you on that. Next up, again, you need to decide, what type of training everyone needs. I personally like to separate out skills training, where they're going to learn the software first, and then follow that up more with the customized learning, with teaching them how to use this, teaching them how to use your newly developed workflows and standards using that new software that they just learned. So kind of combining them in two different training sessions. Some customers do like to combine them, but I personally find that it's definitely much easier for students, to forget and not focus on the standards and workflows when they're lost really in learning the UI and learning the picks and clicks of the software. So if you're able to focus on software first and then follow up after they're confident about their use of the software, you're going to get more out of, they're going to remember more of the workflow and the standards. In making these decisions as well, you may also find that different users need different training because of maybe different roles in the company. So focusing your users into groups by roles really helps them then focus on what they need. And it also will significantly reduce the amount of training that you need to actually put everyone through. So, one set of group of users may need, 10 days of training, but the other group may only need 5. So certainly, look at grouping your users by roles or even experience. Some users may already have experience with some of the software. And then finally, what is the best format for delivery? I initially recommended for the implementation team, having in-person classes where they could really collaborate and all be sure they're learning everything the same way. Certainly, I find more with the end user training that you often get a blended solution here that works best for companies. You might want to combine instructor online with in-person, and then some users might be better off with e-learning self-paced. So, it's a bit of a kind of a balancing act there in terms of what was going to work best for you. But certainly, again, working with any of your training providers certainly can help you with that. Before we continue here, I just wanted to mention one project actually I just recently completed for a federal government agency. And what they were doing, they were moving from MicroStation to AutoCAD, and they were keeping their own data management system. So they were keeping with ProjectWise, and they had 1,500 users. So a very large customer base, end user base that they had to train. And they separated out the training. So they focused on the skills upfront, followed by custom training. The skills training, they basically put everybody through AutoCAD training, and they did that as instructor-led. So there were some in-class sessions that were held, as well as some other classes that were done online. But ultimately, everything went through that way. And then they followed all of that up with customized training. So they engaged with Ascent to create custom training that taught how to use the ProjectWise database with AutoCAD. So we developed a course around that alone, and it assumed that they knew all their AutoCAD skills. So it really was focused on, the check-in, check-out, the process of doing all that with their day-to-day work. They also chose to do the same delivery format of those classes. So they ran 1,500 people through that training. So it was a really large investment. And now what's really interesting is they've come back to us, and we're just going to start up on a new project where they've realized now at this point, for new hires, they have, they can't wait to have a training class. When a new hire starts, they want to get them rolling immediately. So they're looking at an e-learning solution where all of that custom training that we created for them around ProjectWise will be put into Productivity Now, and they'll be able to do the course. And what's really unique about that solution is with a database software specifically, they do not want the users to be going live into the database. So we're creating some really unique solutions with simulations. So the students look and feel like they're actually in the software, but they're not. It's all simulated, but it gives them a really excellent picture and training on how to use the software. So that was kind of a neat project that really kind of encompasses everything we've just talked about. Often, the question I get at this point is always, so how much will it cost me? Firstly, you should definitely consider that content development, if it's needed, so any unique content, and delivery will be 2 different costs. So training providers will definitely be able to provide you with daily rates in terms of helping you plan, for the training of your users. But in terms of the kind of the custom learning content development, honestly, it's very difficult to give an answer to this without really knowing, how the software is going to be used. Those workflows and standards that actually get documented during implementation, those really give a good guide for, how much development is going to have to happen, the type of content that needs to be created. I often like right at this stage could give rough orders of magnitude estimates after kind of initial discussions, getting a little idea. At least for budgetary reasons, that will help you at the beginning of an implementation, set aside money. But to give an accurate estimate, it really is impossible until really after you develop all those standards and workflows, all of that implementation stuff is completed and tested before we can give really accurate estimate on cost. I mentioned as well that users need skills training, as well as any kind of training that they might have custom with your standards and workflows. And in both cases as well, there's also a range of customization costs. For example, if you're looking at skills training on its own, you can have standard out of the box training. So, you could register for a standard class that Rand 3D offers, and you would be able to, take the exact training from there, which might be a perfect solution, no extra cost other than the training class. Topic-based customization is another type of customization. And this is where often customers might say, well, that's a 5-day class. I don't need maybe 20% of that content. Can we get that down to 4 days? So we can pull out content and customize as well for a very minimal customization cost. The third kind of level of customization often I talk to customers about would be maybe customizing any kind of exercises or projects with it. For example, like in terms of a project, sometimes after those 4 days of training, you might want to give your users an actual project that has them creating, your part, something that's familiar to them. And so we can work with customers to create kind of that project customization, a project exercise that, allows them to work through that. So certainly some range in there as well that I just wanted to mention. And then finally, to teach all of your unique standards and workflows, in my opinion, this is where you want to budget for customized learning content development. This, will be the case whether you plan to pre-train your users on the software skills, so without using maybe the out-of-the-box training, or incorporate both of them together into, one unique training guide. So in either case that's where the significant costs of development do occur. And again, work with your partners on coming up with estimates for some of that stuff. So to kind of finish this topic, I'd just like to leave you with a couple recommendations. Definitely think about defining your user roles. This allows you to identify like learning paths that are going to show and define the least each of those users are going to need to know, and train them only on that material. So it will help reduce training days, that type of thing for those groups. Consider all the delivery methods, figure out what's going to work for your user base the most, and don't focus solely on what's the least expensive, focus truly on what is going to be the best way to train your users, because ultimately the success of your implementation is going to be on, how your users are going to be executing it, when you go live. And, decide where to efficiently use your budget to create that custom content. I certainly am open to having conversations to help you make some of those decisions, and certainly feel free to reach out at any time. And I'll leave my contact information at the end. So again, the training of your end users is going to be that key to successful implementation. Don't wait to think about this phase till the very, very end. Do that planning right at the very beginning. So, over the course of describing the key aspects of kind of learning and documentation that you should be considering during implementation, I've certainly mentioned the types of partners that you could work with. But before finishing my session, I just want to give a quick mention of my company Ascent and what we certainly can do. And it should give you an idea of, whether you're interested in working with us or partnering with someone else, the types of expertise you actually should be looking for in a partner. I previously mentioned that we have technical writers, instructional designers, and technical subject matter experts. And these resources are exactly the types of people you want to be looking for. Often a lot of resellers have subject matter experts that train and teach classes, but that's their job. And you certainly want resources that focus on content development full-time as the people that are going to be working with your content. During the documentation phase, we have as well technical editors that can also be that documentation specialist and consult with you on, formats, the designs, the templates, so that, you get that professional quality, helps build that confidence in your user base. And then during the training stage, our learning content developers, certainly can work with you to customize or develop any kind of learning content that you're going to need. We are uniquely positioned in this market because, also our relationship with our sister company, Rand 3D. So, we have access to their technical resources as well. So, there's always a lot of feedback back and forth of, what works in training classes, what doesn't. So, it's a really great partnership we have between the two groups. So to finish up, and before I open kind of the room to some questions, I'd like to review this summary image that really highlights all of the learning and documentation elements that we just discussed, and that you should keep in mind. This is certainly not a pie chart, that describes efforts. It's simply showing, all the pieces that you really need to be considering as part of the whole. In the upper right quadrant there, we began talking about the importance of sending the implementation team for training. And this certainly ensures that they learn and understand, what that software has to offer. Don't limit the scope of this training. Allow that team to learn what is possible with the software. And after this, the team will then be better prepared for making all those tough implementation decisions that are going to come. I did put the implementation quadrant in gray simply because, it wasn't only the focus of this presentation, but, it's absolutely a key piece and probably the most important piece of it all. But it's going to be during that phase that all the decisions are going to be made. So it really leads nicely into that next quadrant where it talks about we talked about the importance of actually documenting your standards and workflows. This is where you're writing and you're keeping track of all of those decisions that are being made. And you're not just leaving them in one or two team members' heads, you're actually documenting as you go. And it's really creating that playbook that's going to reflect the decisions of the team. We talked about ensuring you allow the time to complete this step. I mentioned using a documentation specialist on the team that's sole focus is that. So, you can get your clear and concise documents that are going to be really easily consumable at the very end of all of this. And as a reminder, again, I would also highly recommend that you create a documentation policy. That's going to explain, the who, the what, the where, the when, what these documents are, why they're being used, why you have such importance placed on them, really to get that buy-in from your users. So, often these bottom two quadrants I've listed here, are done in parallel or, just prior to the completion of implementation, so that all those documents are really ready for the final step when you're ready to start training your entire design team. So we spent lots of time talking also then about this final quadrant, which was about, training, and how you can plan for it, how you can execute on it to ensure that, the entire implementation is then successful. Whether you use standard training material that's going to be available to you or create your own customized materials. You just want to make sure you're planning for this at the beginning of your project. So once again, thank you so much for attending today, and I hope that I gave you some things to think about. I've added my contact information here, and feel free to grab a screenshot of this and certainly reach out to myself if you have any questions.